Hi, everybody. I'm Delisa. I'm the Dream Doula for Women, and I help them live their best life.
Hi, my name is Stacey Silberman, and I am super passionate about the new topic of women and ADHD and parents who have ADHD and have children with ADHD.
Oh, wow. That's such a current topic. Who doesn't think they have ADHD right now that's an adult? I've met so many people recently who have said to me, "Oh, I just got diagnosed with ADHD. Now I understand everything."
And understanding is such a key point here
Mm,
because I could say that I never understood myself until I realized that I really had ADHD as opposed to kind of joking about it for
yeah.
many years. And I didn't figure it out till I was like 60.
When I was around the age 45, 50. Wow, I can't remember how old I was, but my uh, husband and I were getting divorced, and I was taking the kids to this therapist. And the therapist said, "Honey, do you want to fill out this form and we'll see if you have ADHD?" And then she looked at me, she goes, "Mom, do you want to fill one out too?" And I said to her, of course, because we all just joke about it until we know it's true. I'm like, of course I have ADHD, and I'm an artist, and it works out fine for me. So we took that um, carbon paper questionnaire home, and neither of us filled it out.
Really?
But I'm 100% sure we both have that as a superpower.
Yeah,
So tell me more about ADHD and how did you find out that you have it finally?
so the way that I really, really realized it is during COVID. When COVID first hit, I was a realtor and I was doing very well. But then there was COVID, and so I had 9 months of kind of sitting around. And then I took a
Mm,
job as a chef in a treatment center because I was really bored. And while I was
okay.
working there, I had an epiphany. Not only did I have definitely have ADHD, but 80% of the staff and clients had it too.
80% of the staff and the clients at a treatment center, and this was a drug and alcohol treatment center?
Correct.
Wow. So you saw that ADHD leads you to addiction.
Definitely. I mean, there's documented research on top of that, which I had never ever heard anything about. I had never
Yeah.
heard anybody talk about the connection between ADHD and substance use disorder.
Wow. Well, I've never heard anybody talk about it either or connect those but it makes so much sense because people get addicted because they want to get out of some kind of pain they're in. They're looking for relief from the pain to do whatever that addictive behavior is, I believe.
Yes.
And if you're ADHD, you're probably in pain a lot because you're not getting stuff done that you want to get done. You're like the cartoon squirrel, right?
It's not just that though. It's that not all ADHD is hyperactivity physically.
Mm.
For women in particular, our hyperactivity is in our minds. And so we don't present the same way as boys, which is why they didn't catch it, which is why so many people are coming out as having ADHD now, because women never got diagnosed. It wasn't even like something they looked at because they didn't do any research on girls, only on boys.
Well, and if it's in our mind, how does anyone know? We have to tell them that we're having a squirrel thought that's going over and over and over in our mind, and then we're thinking about this other thing, and then we're not behaving rambunctiously like young kids would. The young boys are probably like just running around like crazy. We used to call them the short attention span kids when I was young.
Right.
Oh, that boy, he just has a short attention span. That's his problem.
Well, I think my son was more referred to as a real troublemaker, and
A
that's
troublemaker.
but what I was going to say about girls is girls are more dreamers, so we're like in dreamland. Like they're
Mm,
teaching us something and we may not be paying attention. So that's, but we're thinking about 20 other things. So that we're like hyper focusers a lot of the time. So I'm a hyper
mm.
focused one. There's 7 different types of ADHD according to Dr. Amen, a psychiatrist of over 40 years who's done over 250,000 brain scans. And what he can see is which type of ADHD you have by the stimuli in the brain and where it is affected. So if you're understimulated or overstimulated, is it in the, in the frontal cortex? Is it in the other parts of the brain? And there's different levels too. So like my executive function is pretty good, or I've maybe trained myself over many
Mm.
years. But other people that I see out there with ADHD they're just not able to function. But there's so many very successful ADHDers who are like, I'm a pattern reader, so I see all these little things in between. And then also they're just very creative, like you are, and other things. So there's a lot of gifts with it. But the worst part
Yeah,
of it is the criticism that they get in school, and the number
yeah.
that they refer to is 200% more criticism to an ADHD child through their school career than a neuronormal child.
I'm glad we're in the world now of neuronormal being the minority of people because there's so many people that are proud to be neurodivergent and they're saying it's not a flaw, it's my superpower. Can you do you know off the top of your head the 7 different kinds of ADHD? I'd be so curious to hear about those.
I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but for example, there's one called Ring of Fire, there's one called Inattentive, there's the hyper focused kind. Um, You know what? I'd have to look at Dr. Amen's list to see, but basically that is determined by where it affects your brain when he looks at brain scans
Mm,
and whether
right.
it's understimulated or overstimulated or both. There's another type called combined, which could be all of it.
Wow. Um, yeah, but I think most people think about ADHD being the inattentive style. So you can't pay attention. You must have ADD, ADHD. What is going on? Yeah, hello in there. Um, and to think that you could scan the brain and figure out what kind of ADHD you have is fascinating to me.
Exactly. I mean, Dr. Amen says if you're treating an organ, you should look at it. And
Yeah, and so you're treating the
psychiatrists,
brain.
right, psychiatrists never look at the brain in most cases. This is a newer approach. And and because they're putting all these kids on these different medications, well, the different ADHD medications treat different aspects of ADHD depending on where it is in the brain, whether you're understimulated, overstimulated, etc. Some are about dopamine, some are about serotonin. But other than that, they do trial and error. Let's try this one. And if it doesn't work, we'll try that one. And then in the meantime, the kid's kind of messed up.
Right. Yeah, I remember one of the kids that went to middle school and high school with one of my daughters was on ADHD drugs, and it must have been the upper to get her to focus because she was very scatterbrained. But if she took her, she's like, oh, I was up all night because I took my meds too late. And so, it can affect somebody's well-being, not only it lets them focus, but then it doesn't let them sleep all night.
Yeah, most of those medications are stimulant based.
Right.
And so, because like the other way you can treat ADHD, depending on how, if it's like a lesser case with younger children, is you could give them good quality caffeine, like a half a cup of coffee. And then the trick is using L-theanine. So the other trick is using amino acids because amino acids are precursors to dopamine access. And the reason that ADHDers mostly have problems is because we do create dopamine. It's in our funnel, but it's stuck. So we can't release it into our system. We're always short on dopamine. And what L-theanine and caffeine does is it kind of stimulates access to that neurochemical. And so, yeah, I mean, ADHD is really like a nervous system disorder, basically, and like a brain disorder. But it doesn't mean your brain is messed up. Your brain is just in a different, just works a little differently.
I love that idea. So the naturopathic cure might be L-theanine with caffeine or some kind of other stimulant that would work for the person so their brain is connecting to the nervous system in a better way.
I mean, I use this coffee called the Daily Dose. Well, I don't know if you want me to mention a brand. And it
Yeah,
is
why not?
specifically formulated for people with neurodivergence. So it's filled with like collagen, mushrooms, like nootropic mushrooms, the amino acids, and things that help us to focus. So it's only got like 39% caffeine. So it's not too caffeinated. So, I mean, when people talk to me about ADHD now, I'm like, get that dose coffee, try that on your child, because it might be just enough to avoid
Yeah.
the use. Like, if I had it to do all over again for my son, who had a fairly good case of it, probably combined, I would probably want to put him on medication if I knew that he was clearly diagnosed, which he was not until he was like 15.
Yeah, so his whole childhood you didn't know that there was something you could do to help him.
We tested him, we did all the tests, but the diagnosis is based on like having like 7 characteristics, 7 traits of
Hmm,
like a group of 9. And my son
right.
always fell into this gray area. And so we tested him, we did everything, he started therapy when he was 4.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
but I mean, that's part of my regret, but I didn't have the knowledge and the experts didn't have the knowledge either at that time. So there's there's nothing I can do to change that, but I can change it now, which is what I'm attempting to do by training for a TEDx talk and then going on the TEDx stage to talk about it. And what my basic topic is that parents need to prioritize their own mental health so that they could set a good example for their children, teach them coping skills, help to
Yes.
co-regulate their nervous system, and
Yes.
have a stronger family system, which will lead to better outcomes for kids with ADHD. I truly believe that that would have made a difference for my son.
Let's talk about that for a minute. So, even though your child might be diagnosed with ADHD, whether the parent is diagnosed with ADHD also, you feel like the parent's mental health is super important in helping a kid with ADHD. Tell us more about that.
Well, number one, in a high percentage of cases, if a child is diagnosed with ADHD, they're testing the parents now because it's highly
Mm.
genetic. And they know that
Um,
either the mother or the father or both are going to have it. And since they're not aware of it, they're going to be acting on like things like ADHD rage, which is a trigger, like a quick trigger to anger, and frustration, which is not good for raising children. And,
no.
and like also, my father used to yell at us all the time. So that is what I actually learned. That's the role modeling that I had. So, which is what I'm,
You and me both. We
yeah,
got yelled at or punished physically. And that's that. I mean, it's kind of the age we're in. That was just how people parented. Like, shut up and go to your room. Or that's not how people parent now.
yeah,
Thank
or go
goodness.
play out in the cul-de-sac until we call you back in for dinner. But
Right.
um, both of my parents definitely had ADHD, have and had. My dad is deceased. My mother's still here. But
Mm,
some of it is brought on by trauma too. So there's Gabor Mate, Dr. Mate, who believes that ADHD comes from trauma and attachment, lack of attachment. That may be true, but, and it could be do you know what epigenetics are?
yeah.
So, or it could be epigenetical in the sense of like if it's been in the family for a long, long time and trauma continues, that, they're passing it on through their genetics, number one. And number two, environmentally, it like sticks in the cells as to what they know and have learned. I mean, I know that my mother's father was put in an institution because he tried to kill his whole family, including my mother on her 14th birthday. So I could only guess that he had ADHD, he used stimulants, and he just became mentally ill to the point where he wanted to kill his family. So I didn't know that until much later in my life when my mother had a nervous breakdown at a
Wow.
much when her sister passed away. So like there's all these things like my mother had like kind of held it together but was very dissociated. And so as a child, I just knew that my mother wasn't totally there, but I didn't know why
Yes.
or what, or I didn't understand it.
No, as a child, you probably thought it was your fault.
Yeah, but well, I don't know how much I thought about it. I was a very active child. I was like the combined, I mean, I was physically hyperactive like my son
Mm.
and the hyper focus thing, but I managed to do okay in school, but I was always in trouble. And I mean, going all the way back to kindergarten. And my son's trouble started when he was 18 months. So, I mean, I'm just saying, like, this is
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because I'm realizing that I got sent home from kindergarten and I always thought it was a cute story. Like I brought my father's lighter to school and I was showing my girlfriend under the desk, like, look, you light it and then you close the top and it goes out. Look. And they're like, you could burn the school down. I'm like, what? And end of the day, my dad just said, wondered where my lighter was this morning. Uh, but you know what kid gets in trouble in kindergarten, for goodness sakes? I guess we both did.
when you kind of look back on that. I mean, I was in trouble like pretty much every year for one thing or another. And another thing about ADHDers, we have this very strange sense of justice and injustice. So when
Yeah.
bullies are out and doing things, like I would get activated and I would want to defend the child. I was kind of like a tough little girl. And so I would get in trouble for things like that. And there were
For
things,
defending the victim when they were being
yeah,
bullied.
yeah. But I would be, like doing something you shouldn't be doing at school, like threatening them or chasing them. And I was a very fast, athletic girl, but there's so many things I look back on and I'm like, how did they not know something was wrong with me?
Yeah.
So, but they didn't know. Are you a I mean, I'm like on the cusp of Gen X and Boomer.
Yeah, I'm a
I
boomer.
consider myself more Gen X, which is the generation of the parents like drinking at 5 and like barely being there for us is they wanted a family, but they didn't really want to deal with it.
Well, when I was a kid, my mother was she would say, when I grew up, children were to be seen but not heard. But you can go ahead and talk. But I always knew like the real message there was, don't bother me. You're making too much noise. Or whatever. Children, those children, send them outside to go outside and play was something I heard until I was 18.
Or not allowing us to cry when we feel pain or sadness.
Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about.
Exactly.
Which is ridiculous when you think about it. You can't stop yourself from crying when you're sad, and you shouldn't have to. Um, but I was taught when I used to be in real estate too. I was taught when I was managing a real estate office that if you're in a big meeting and you're a man and you get upset, you often yell. And if you're in an important meeting and you're a woman and you get upset, you often cry. And if you cry, you don't get what you want in that meeting. People just think you're a weak woman, right?
Yeah.
So I was taught that if I had water or coffee and I took a sip, you can't cry and swallow at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard things like that about doing other things to avoid doing something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
How it interferes with
So
the action.
I've taught multiple women, like if you're in a meeting and you think you're going to cry, swallow, drink some water. You'll be able to finish whatever you need to say and not break down because breaking down is losing your power.
Yeah.
Wow. So now that you know you have ADHD, how is your life different?
Well, I have figured out a lot of ways to hack my system. So
Mm,
if I know that I'm a procrastinator, which I can be, I find ways to either number one, use self-compassion and give myself some grace for the times when like I really, my brain just is depleted. It's mostly about being depleted because we
yeah.
get depleted faster because our brains move so fast. We're using a lot of brain energy. And also sometimes like as an ADHDer, we like to interrupt because we're going to forget what we want to say. And
Yeah, I got to say
we'll
it
be like
now.
very excited to say it right now. And I'm still guilty of interrupting. I have to be very mindful as I am now and kind of in a way mask it by just saying to myself, don't interrupt, don't interrupt, just behave, talking to myself in a nice way, but to be compassionate toward myself, plan around it. So, for example, my TEDx speech, I could be ready to do it by the end of this year. I could have been ready to do it next month, but my choice is to wait until like 2025. So January, February, March, April, May is my target time to get it. And why? Because if I have moments of depletion, I can allow myself to take time off and just be okay with that and work on something else. So in my case, I figured out that if I can't write or be creative, that I can watch the videos, that we have to learn about writing the speech and perfecting it. So
Yes.
while I can't do an output action, I can do input, which means I'm just listening to something and taking it in.
Right.
I can do. So
Yeah.
I've figured myself out a little bit, although I'm not perfect and I wouldn't expect to be. I have learned how to overcome a lot of the problems that come with ADHD, including trigger reactions to anger and frustration, which was always my biggest problem.
Impulsively reacting.
Yeah, we're impulsive. Now, they've also made a connection with ADHD that there's a gene for high risk taking. I don't
Mm,
personally have that because I don't have the stomach for the high risk craziness, but my son did, and he did crazy stuff that could have killed him, including, but of course, the drug use. He did have an overdose 7 years ago and he did pass away. So in the end, that risk taking did take his life. But there's a high percentage of ADHDers who have this gene for risk taking, which is partly why they have a higher likelihood to be substance users, and secondly, because of the pain and that they want to numb themselves and that they hate themselves basically because of all the criticism. But I've learned to recondition. After my son passed away, I went on this journey to make changes, and that was one of them. Those were some of the many changes. So, and there's a lot of physical stuff too. Like I have sleep apnea, after he passed away, I got a CPAP machine. I finally like embraced the fact that I wasn't sleeping well, which affects everything.
yes.
So there's just so many
Do you also, sorry to interrupt.
interruptions. I did
Do
that.
you also think that you're an empath?
Oh, I'm definitely an empath. And the other
Yeah.
thing that I have in terms of like a lot of ADHDers are highly intuitive.
Yes.
It is intuition, it's intuition, and it's also our ability to read what I call patterns. They say it's pattern reading, and it's like literally being able to see all the little details that most people don't catch.
Oh, yes.
And seeing people's behavior very closely and in a different way. So we can read people very well, number one, and it doesn't take us long. Like I'm always like, why do I know what that person is? Like, how do I know that? Now, I also believe that the spirits send me messages too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I never know the difference as to how that happens because I'm not trying to figure that out. I just know that when ideas come into my head, and I wonder, like, how did I know that? I just, I'm like, okay, so now that I know that, what am I going to do with it? And sometimes I do positive things with it, and sometimes I can ruminate on them. because rumination is another ADHD thing. It's like a loop of rethinking
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about
Mm-hmm.
all the things I did wrong. And that also leads to drug addiction and alcoholism, because we can't get over things as fast as we should.
Right. Right. Well, let's talk about the intuition piece for a quick minute because I have recently heard several people who are channels say, I can't be sure I'm really channeling or if it's coming from my subconscious mind, but does it matter? And I think that if uh, if we're the kind of people who are teaching and coaching and inspiring people with our words, it doesn't matter where the words came from. If it came from our own brain, our own intellect, our subconscious mind, or guides and angels, as long as what we're sharing is helpful for other people, I'm good with it. I don't need to know really where it came from. And sometimes I agree with you. I get this idea about someone or something, and I'm like, why do I know that? Or why is that person so familiar? But I just met them right now. But it seems like we have this other deeper connection. It's like, hmm, life is a mystery.
Exactly. It's kind of like oh, I forget the word for it, but like when you feel like you've experienced them before or experienced the situation before. That's the other
Deja vu.
thing is we have a weak working memory. So
Oh, thank you for saying that because I just did a talk in this local group where I do a talk once a month called I Don't Remember Names, all about all the things I've tried to do to remember names and the memory skills and the classes I've taken. And I write it down and I think about it. And I might know you. I might have talked to you multiple times. I see you in town. I'm like, remind me what your name is. I remember their story.
I remember faces all the time, and I always say that, and this has been going on for years because I was in sales, and I say, it takes me two times of an introduction to remember a name with a face. But what I'll say to people if I forget it and I'm kind of embarrassed, I'll just say, hey, I'm really sorry. I have a little bit of a weak memory sometimes. What is your name again? And then my name, and then I kind of make it kind of funny. And I go, my name is Stacy. And most of the time they've forgotten too. So
Sure. Yeah, they forgot your name, so they don't care if you forgot
it's
their name.
fair game. But well, so we have what's called weak working memory,
Mm,
but my other types of memory, long term, short term, are phenomenal. Like I'll remember so many weird details. I don't remember a lot of my childhood because that was traumatic. So I think
right,
I blocked some of it out. But
right.
my memory is incredible for like details of like I used to memorize my whole schedule. Like if I when I was in sales, like I have an appointment at this time, da 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 da. Even though I'd write it down, I would memorize it all, and I'd memorize all the phone numbers.
Oh, I used to do that too. One of my other real estate broker friends said, I know someone's phone number until the deal closes and then I forget it.
Oh, that's funny.
And I said, What? How
Interesting.
interesting. And then I recognized that in myself too. So I'd remember their phone number, their address, their names. Maybe not so much nowadays that the iPhone remembers every number for you, but I would be able to like call them up. And then a few days after the house sale closed, I'd be like, What is their number? I'd have to
Well,
look it up.
I've taken a lot of neuroscience courses. My mom and I used to go together and listen to
Hmm.
lectures because we just love learning.
Yeah.
And this was before I knew I had ADHD. But they said that they've done research to show that the brain could only hold so much information at a time. So if it has too much, like it only can hold so many facts in a current time period. So if you're not using something, like you're done with the deal and you're no longer using that number, it kind of goes away because you're making room for another memory.
I love that theory, except for one thing. When I learned all the factoids that I needed to know to take the broker's exam in the state of Washington, I learned that there are 43,560 square feet in an acre. Now, Why can't I remember Joe's name that I met last week at the grocery store? Because that is stuck in there. I'm like, there's things in there I don't need anymore. Let's get rid of like I only in 35 years of selling real estate, I only really needed that once or twice. I was
I've
selling
never needed.
houses and but it was a test question and I memorized that number.
Yeah. I passed the
So,
test the first time, but I
yeah.
was the last one to finish the test. So what it is because those questions are so tricky. They're like double and triple negatives.
Yes.
So they're trying to trick us. So the trick is to like read it slowly. So in terms of like getting back to the memory thing, there's like
Yeah.
three different types of memory, I believe. There's short-term, long-term, and working memory. So working memory will be memorizing my damn speech. So I'm going to have a
Yes.
hard time with that. So I gave myself
Mm.
extra time to allow myself, because if I do it the way that works for me, which is just basically just being repetitious and then practicing, they also say that whatever state you memorize something in should be the same state that you're going to deliver that in if it's a speech. So,
Oh,
so like there's like there's something to like if you memorize something while you were drunk, which would never happen for me because I don't even drink anymore, then you better deliver it while you're drunk. I'm just using that as an example
that
because
makes
like,
sense.
and not really.
That makes sense. Yeah. So if you're stoned or drunk when you doing this task that you're practicing for later, we don't recommend this, but you need to be stoned and drunk to remember it later.
Right.
Um,
And the other thing,
or calm.
is a mental state. So
Yeah.
you should be regulated. Now let's talk about the good way. You should have your nervous system regulated while you're learning the speech so that you can deliver it in a regulated state. But if you memorize it in a dysregulated state and then want to deliver it regulated, you may not remember. Your brain's in a different place.
Right. And we can all imagine standing on the TEDx stage and forgetting your words. That's,
I just felt that in my body, like as fear.
yeah.
That is a fear for me.
Um, that is not what we want to do when we're standing up on a stage. We want to wow people and share our stories and be amazing.
Yeah.
And remember all the words.
And when you memorize your speech, you want to like eventually you want to practice it with all the emotion that you want to deliver, but saving
Mm,
just a little extra punch for the real speech. So you deliver
yes.
your like highest level of emotion, like they say, be a 12 so that you could deliver a 10.
Well, I can't wait to hear your speech. I want to hear it now.
I'm still writing it. So I keep writing things and then editing. Then I'll go to the talk practice and I'll say it, I'll speak it out loud, not really well knowing it. Like I just did my
Hmm.
up and down story. And I've struggled quite a lot with having an up story because I have so many kind of hard memories.
Yeah.
It clouds my memory of good things. Just like I guess I always wondered why my daughter only remembered the bad times. We'd go to therapy together and she'd be like, I remember that. And I'd be like, what about the good times? So now I understand where she was coming from.
Yeah.
So I've struggled with that. And then now my struggle is bringing the real emotion without losing my mind to like when I say talk about my son, like the worst time in my life was by far the day I found my son's lifeless body. And then having
And yes, and that's going to be the bomb that you drop on people at the beginning of your TED Talk.
it will come in my down story. So
Okay.
it'll come within a few minutes
Yeah.
of the speech. And then I'm going to go into my journey from that very down point,
Hmm.
I'll bring it back up again. And it'll be like a lot about like what I've learned, how I've learned it, my regrets as a mom, and then talking about like if I had known to prioritize my own mental health, I would have been so much more patient and compassionate toward my children when they were in trouble. But when you're getting all these calls from the principal every day and the teachers are after you, it's really like when they're in trouble, you're in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, there's really no way to not take it personally when your kids are not doing well.
Well, of course, like we care so much about our kids, but we're not caring necessarily about the right things. We're
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, my kid, like we're conditioned to believe our kids have to be really smart, they have to excel, they have to go to the best colleges. That is not necessarily true. And I've changed my thinking on all that because I should have been thinking my son is struggling with his mental health. And school should have been put aside. Like, yes, you still need to do this, but more importantly, I need to make sure that you're not going down into the abyss and becoming a suicidal adolescent, which
Yes.
he did.
Yes.
And he didn't die of suicide, but he died of a fentanyl poisoning at the beginning when they didn't even know it was an issue. So we didn't really know. Like we had no idea about any of that. So it was an accidental overdose. 100% believe that in my heart. I've had him come to me spiritually right after he died. I literally had there was so much so much activity going on in our home at the time, and I mean like angel, spirit, portal, dreams, nightmares, what I felt was psychic attacks in my home at that time. That I mean, and I was very dysregulated, obviously being a mother who just lost her child. And then I've got my husband and my daughter who are also, we're like a whole house full of dysregulated, very hysterical people.
Yeah.
And I always felt it was kind of my part of my job to keep us sane as much as possible. But a few days after my son passed away, he literally came to me and told me how he died. He showed me. And it was like a heart attack, but that could be from drug use or whatever. um but yeah, cardiac arrhythmias run in my family. My sister died 3 years ago at 57 of a cardiac arrhythmia, dropped dead. um
Mm.
so those are my daughter, my son and my sister are the ones that I call in the most. They're very intelligent young people. As humans and as spirits, they're way smarter.
So when you're talking to people on the other side, you've got your guides and angels, but your go-to people are your son and your sister.
Well, they're part of my team. Because I
Okay.
call in like, all of them. The whole, I call in a whole lot of them, and that's my spirit team. And I just allow them to send me guidance and to co-create with me. And that on the physical plane and they're in the spiritual plane, and let's join together and bring it all here. Let's bring as much power as we have to do good in the world. And
Yes.
that's what I look for in my spiritual relationship.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of parents who've lost a child would be comforted by your story that you can still connect with your beloveds who've passed over. And you absolutely know that that is true.
Oh, I absolutely know it. And it's weird because I hadn't ever heard of that happening with people where a departed one comes back and literally, because like I did past life regression like about 20 years ago. And
Hmm.
I did a lot of I've done, like I said, my first therapist was a mystic priestess. Like
I
she
love it.
literally was a mystic priestess. Now, I didn't know that when I went to her. That just happened to happen. And she was a major Jungian. So all of her work, shockingly, was about dream work.
Hmm.
And we did a lot with, like at the time, my dreams were very active and kind of crazy. And like I told you, in all my dreams when I was younger, I was always flying. And
Yeah, that's right.
it felt very real to me, and I was a flapper. Like I'd be literally feeling like I was doing that to fly, and I felt it physically. And in my past life regressions, my doctor said I was like one of it was part of the 10% who feels things on a physical level when they're having a past life regression, because only a
Mm.
small percentage are like that. And you know, of course, I'm like, of course, I'm an anomaly on so many levels. Even if I go to the dentist, you know, my nerves are different, and that's probably ADHD related. If they give me Novocaine, it takes longer, it takes more Novocaine.
Right.
You know, things like that, you know, medical things, you know, I mean, it was weird when I had my first child, I was in labor for 30 hours because I just wasn't dilating properly. So they gave me the Pitocin, gave me the block, and then they had to take it away. And then they had all these medical students coming in. Anyway, it was a real adventure, but um, it just, it's nothing's just like standard.
That's because you're special.
Yeah, I'm special. Oh,
Oh,
so, I mean, I like to say, you know, like I went on one time I went on a cycling trip through Tuscany with a bunch of bicyclists, people who were good at it, and I was definitely the special ed of that trip.
wait for me. Wait for me.
I basically had my own person because it was a really hard trip. They were supposed to be all women, and this year they invited men, and they were like animals, and I wasn't even a cyclist.
Well, good for you for signing up for a trip where you're not even a cyclist, but you're going cycling. So that's a big adventure in its own
Yeah.
imagination.
Well,
Oh
that's
my
where you get to
gosh.
jump in the sag van to go uphill and take all the photos. And then I got
Yes,
really fast downhill, which I loved.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay, if you have a parting word for parents who may have ADHD children or they have ADHD themselves, what would it be?
My advice is to get as much support as you can. And there's a lot of free resources out there or inexpensive resources out there. There's ADHD coaches. I would like to see there be a lot more group therapy offerings out there for both parents specifically, neuronormal parents, neuronormal children, because they're stressed too.
Yeah.
The US Surgeon General just put out an advisory about it. The parents are stressed more than ever in this country. That was in August. And then
Wow.
that ADHD parents with ADHD children need to seek a more specialized groups like whether it be behavioral tricks or just how to keep your own nervous system regulated so that you can regulate with your children to help them to learn how to self-soothe and to cope with the daily struggles that comes with ADHD.
Mm. Well, thank you for everything you do in the world. And we'll put in the show notes how people can find you if they want to know more about what you do and who you are.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I so appreciate you talking to me, and you were great. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.